Change has a funny way of sneaking up on you, sometimes through a move across the city, sometimes through silence that lingers too long in a shared room. For me, it began the night I realized how much my flat no longer felt like mine alone. When I first moved in with him, I told myself it was just temporary. A few months, maybe a year. Split the rent, share the chores, have someone around so the evenings didn't echo with the sound of my own thoughts. That was the plan. What I didn't plan on was how easily he'd fit into the spaces of my life. How his laughter filled the flat like sunlight. How his messy habits somehow made the place feel alive. He was everything I wasn't. Confident without trying. A little reckless, and somehow always the center of attention even when he wasn't trying to be. We'd met through a mutual friend at a game night. Both looking for new places after a round of rent hikes drove half the city into chaos. He needed a room. I had one. Simple enough. Now, almost a year later, the simplicity had worn thin. Not because of him exactly, but because of me. He'd walk around the flat in those loose joggers, half asleep, hair in a mess, and I'd feel something I couldn't name. It wasn't just attraction, it was a sort of ache, a longing to be noticed in a way I knew I shouldn't want. He was straight. At least, that's what he'd said the first week we moved in. We were sitting on the floor surrounded by half-unpacked boxes and cheap takeaway containers, when he mentioned his ex-girlfriend, brushing the thought off casually, like it didn't matter anymore. But it mattered to me. It was the quiet confirmation that what I felt could never be said aloud. Still, we got along absurdly well. He had this habit of dragging me into things. Movie nights I didn't plan, late-night walks to the corner shop, or debates about which crisps were elite. I'd tease him about his taste in music. He'd mock my obsession with tidiness. Somehow beneath the jokes and arguments, there was comfort. Familiarity. Tonight, that comfort felt different. We were packing for a short university field trip to the countryside. An environmental design project that required us to stay overnight in a guest cottage. Just the two of us, since the others had bailed last minute. He was sprawled across the sofa, scrolling through his phone, while I double-checked my camera batteries and sketchbook. "You're really overpacking," he said, not looking up. "It's one night, not an expedition." I glanced at him. Says the guy who once forgot his charger and stole mine for a week. He grinned, that half smile that always knocked something loose inside my chest. "And yet you still forgave me. You're too soft, mate." That word, mate, always hit harder than it should. I pretended to laugh, tucking away the ache beneath the noise. Someone's got to keep things functioning around here. He tossed a cushion at me, and I dodged it, though not before noticing the way his eyes lingered a little too long. A flicker of something unreadable there. I told myself I imagined it. I usually did. Later that night, as I zipped up my bag and glanced around the room we shared, a strange feeling tugged at me. We'd spent so many nights here. Him on his side, me on mine. A wall of unspoken boundaries between us. But something about tomorrow felt like the start of a shift I couldn't undo. I didn't know what it was yet. Maybe it was the trip. Maybe it was the way his laughter still echoed faintly from the hallway. Or maybe it was just that quiet, persistent thought whispering in the back of my mind. That I'd already crossed some invisible line, and the rest of me hadn't caught up to it yet. Whatever it was coming. And for the first time in a long while, I wasn't sure if I was ready. We left early the next morning, our bags slung over our shoulders and half-finished coffees warming our hands. The air outside carried that soft chill that comes just before winter sets in, and for once the city felt quiet, almost expectant. He was driving, of course. He always preferred to be behind the wheel, even though his idea of navigation mostly involved guessing turns and trusting his instincts. I wasn't sure how he managed to get anywhere, but somehow he always did. "Got the directions?" I asked, glancing at the sat-nav that blinked, searching for a signal. He shot me a grin. "Who needs directions when you've got me?" I rolled my eyes. "That's exactly what you said last time. We ended up outside a farm." "Yeah," he said, laughing as he pulled into the main road. "But you have to admit those goats were a highlight." I shook my head, trying not to smile. "You nearly got chased by one." Key word being nearly. That was us. Always halfway between teasing and laughing, both pretending not to notice the small silences that lingered after the jokes. As the miles rolled by, the city gave way to stretches of open countryside. The fields looked almost golden in the morning light, and the sky seemed wider out here, endless and clean. I caught myself watching his reflection in the window, his fingers drumming against the steering wheel, his lips curved into that half-smile he wore when he was quietly content. He noticed. "What?" he said, turning slightly, a faint smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Nothing." I said too quickly, focusing on my coffee cup. Just surprised you haven't gotten us lost yet. He laughed, and I felt a ridiculous sense of relief. We stopped halfway for snacks, the kind of roadside convenience shop that smelled faintly of petrol and fried food. He insisted on buying crisps, 2 different kinds because variety keeps life exciting, and a pack of chewing gum. He handed me one of the crisp bags with a little grin. For the road. You're aware we've been driving for less than an hour? Preparation, my friend. Friend. Another word that shouldn't have felt as heavy as it did. By the time we reached the guest cottage, the sun was already starting to dip behind the hills. The place was smaller than I expected. Just a single living space with a tiny kitchen and 2 beds separated by a wooden nightstand. Cozy, in a way that felt almost too intimate. Bit tight, isn't it? He said, dropping his bag near the door. It's fine, I replied, trying to sound casual. We'll make it work. He stretched, yawning. I'll take the bed by the window. You don't mind, right? Not at all. I didn't, not really. But part of me wondered if he'd chosen that bed because he knew I liked the view, the quiet way the light filtered through in the morning. He noticed things like that, even if he pretended not to. Dinner was simple. Instant noodles, a few snacks, and endless conversation. We talked about everything and nothing. Childhood holidays, terrible school memories, the future neither of us had really figured out. Do you ever think about what you actually want to do? I asked, half out of curiosity, half to distract myself from how close he was sitting. He shrugged, leaning back on his hands. Sometimes. But then I think, I'm not in a rush. Life's already weird enough, you know. No point overthinking it, I smiled faintly. You never overthink anything, he laughed softly. That's why you're here. To do it for me. It was said like a joke, but something in his tone made my chest tighten. I wanted to say something. Anything. But all I managed was a quiet chuckle before he turned back to his drink. Later, when we were getting ready for bed, the smallness of the room hit me all at once. The lamps threw soft amber light across the walls, and everything felt too quiet. He lay down first, arm draped over his pillow, half asleep within minutes. I tried to focus on my sketchbook, the faint sound of his breathing filling the room. Then the complication came. The old heater, which had been humming weakly since we arrived, let out a sputtering sound, and died. Just like that, he sat up, frowning. You've got to be kidding. Looks like it's done for the night, I said, tapping the metal casing. It was cold, he exhaled, rubbing his hands together. Brilliant. Middle of nowhere, and we're going to freeze. It's not that bad, I lied. It really was. The temperature was dropping fast, and the air felt sharp against my skin. He looked around, then at me. All right, hear me out. We can double up on the blankets. Share them, I blinked. Share? He raised an eyebrow. You've got a better idea? Of course I didn't. But the thought of lying that close to him made my heart pound. Fine, I said, pretending to be unfazed. Just don't steal the blanket. No promises, he said with a grin. We shifted both duvets onto one bed, layering them clumsily. He climbed in first, clearly amused by the whole thing, while I hesitated for a second before lying beside him. There was enough space between us technically, but it didn't feel like it. The heat of his body seeped through the sheets, and I could feel every small movement he made. For a while, neither of us said anything. Then he spoke softly, his voice half asleep. You're quiet tonight. Just tired, I murmured. He turned slightly toward me, his breath brushing my shoulder. You always say that when something's on your mind. I froze. Do I? Yeah, he said, yawning. You're a terrible liar. He didn't press further, but the words lingered long after his breathing evened out again. I lay there, staring at the faint outline of the ceiling, trying not to think about the way our arms had brushed, or the fact that every quiet exhale from him made my chest ache a little more. Something had shifted tonight. Something small, almost invisible, but I felt it, heavy and certain, resting between us in the dark. I woke to the sound of movement, the rustle of fabric, the soft creak of the mattress. For a moment I forgot where I was. Then I felt the faint warmth beside me, and memories snapped back like a pulled thread. He was still asleep, his back turned slightly toward me, one arm tucked under the pillow, the other hanging off the side of the bed. The morning light filtered weakly through the curtains, brushing gold across his hair. For a while, I just lay there, listening to the rhythm of his breathing. It was a peaceful kind of torture. I shifted slightly, careful not to wake him, but the movement made the bed dip, and he stirred. His eyes fluttered open, still hazy from sleep. You up already? Yeah, I said softly. Couldn't really sleep. He yawned, stretching, his arm brushing mine. You're weird. Who wakes up early on a field trip? You know, most people call it being responsible. He smirked. And yet, you still forgot the coffee. That earned him a glare, which only made him grin wider. It was too easy with him, too natural, too dangerous. Every casual touch, every careless word chipped away at whatever distance I tried to keep. We spent the morning gathering photos and sketches for our project. The hills behind the cottage were steep but beautiful, dotted with moss-covered stones and the occasional flock of sheep. He complained about the climb, pretending to be out of breath until I laughed, and then admitted he was fine. By midday, we'd wandered further than planned, following a narrow path that wound through a cluster of old trees. The air was still, the kind that feels thick with memory. It should have been perfect, quiet, calm, but something about it felt off. Wait, I said, glancing at the map on my phone. This isn't the path we took earlier. He frowned. What do you mean? It's the same way. It's not, I said, turning in a slow circle. The trees looked unfamiliar now, closer somehow, as if the forest had shifted while we weren't paying attention. He exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. All right, fine. Maybe I took a wrong turn. I looked up at him. Maybe? Relax, he said, flashing that easy grin again. We'll figure it out. Except we didn't. After another 30 minutes of walking, the signal vanished entirely, and the temperature dropped. The path was uneven, and the clouds thickened overhead. When he stopped suddenly, I nearly ran into him. Okay, he said, glancing around. I'll admit it. I have no idea where we are. I gave him a look. You said you didn't need directions. Yeah, well, he muttered. I was wrong. Happy? I sighed, trying not to laugh. Thrilled. We eventually found a narrow shelter, more of a tool shed than anything else, tucked near the edge of the woods. Inside it was cramped, with barely enough room for both of us to sit. But it was dry and out of the wind. He sat first, leaning against the wall with a sigh. Cozy, he said, smirking. Claustrophobic, I countered, ducking to avoid hitting my head on a wooden beam. Same thing. He handed me his water bottle, and for a moment our fingers brushed. I froze, but he didn't seem to notice. Or maybe he did. Because when he looked at me next, his expression had softened slightly. You're shivering, he said quietly. I'm fine. He tilted his head, unconvinced. Then, before I could react, he shifted closer, his shoulder pressing lightly against mine. Better? I swallowed. You don't have to. Just stop talking, he murmured, teasing but gentle. You overthink everything. He was right. I did. And right now my mind was doing too much of it. The closeness was unbearable and perfect all at once. I could feel the warmth radiating from him, smell the faint mix of pine and soap on his jacket. Every small movement, the brush of his sleeve, the quiet sound of his breath, made my heart stumble. He rested his head back against the wall, closing his eyes. You always do that, he said after a moment. Do what? Look like you're somewhere else. Like your head's full of thoughts you'll never say out loud. I hesitated, unsure if it was a question or an observation. Maybe some things are better kept inside. He turned to look at me, his expression unreadable. Or maybe they're better shared. The silence that followed was heavy, the kind that carried weight. I don't want to ruin what we have, I said finally, barely a whisper. He frowned slightly. What do you mean? Nothing. Forget it. He studied me for a moment, eyes searching, then smiled faintly. You're strange, you know that? Thanks. Not in a bad way. He nudged me lightly with his shoulder, and I forced a small laugh. But inside, everything was unraveling, because I wanted him to mean it. Every teasing word, every glance that lasted too long, I wanted them to be something more. And that was the problem. We stayed like that for hours, talking in bursts, falling into silence, talking again. It was strangely easy, even with the tension hanging between us. Eventually, he reached out to adjust his jacket and his hand brushed mine. Neither of us pulled away. When the wind outside picked up, he shifted closer again, his voice barely above a murmur. We'll laugh about this later, yeah? Yeah, I said softly, though I wasn't sure if I believed it. The light outside faded to gray, and for a long time, we didn't speak. The only sound was the steady rhythm of our breathing, the faint brush of fabric each time one of us moved. Then he said, almost to himself, You ever think about how weird it is? The people we end up closest to? I turned my head. Weird how? He shrugged. Just, if someone told me a year ago I'd be stuck in a shed in the middle of nowhere with my roommate, freezing my arse off, I'd have laughed. Lucky you, I said, smiling faintly. He chuckled, then looked at me again, eyes softer than before. Yeah, lucky me. The words hung there between us, unsteady but real. He didn't move away this time, and when our knees brushed, barely, lightly, neither of us pretended not to notice. Something in the air shifted. The space felt smaller, the silence louder. Every heartbeat seemed to echo against the wooden walls. I told myself not to read into it, that it was just comfort, warmth, proximity. But the truth was, his nearness burned through every rational thought I had left. If I turned my head just slightly, I could meet his gaze. If I spoke, I could ruin everything, or change it forever. So I stayed still, quiet, caught in that impossible space between wanting and restraint. And somewhere, deep down, I knew, whatever happened next, we wouldn't be the same. By the time we found our way back to the cottage, the world outside had sunk into quiet darkness. The walk had taken longer than expected, and neither of us had spoken much since leaving the shed. Every word seemed too fragile to touch. Inside, the warmth of the small room felt unreal after the cold, but it didn't ease the tension between us. He dropped his bag by the door and ran a hand through his hair, sighing. "Well," he said finally, "that was an adventure." "An avoidable one," I replied, forcing a half-smile. He laughed quietly. "All right, I'll take that. My fault. But admit it, you'll remember this more than the project." "Probably," I said, sitting on the edge of the bed. "You and your brilliant navigation skills." He grinned, the kind that always made my chest tighten. "Hey, at least I didn't panic." "Right," I said, unzipping my jacket, "because getting lost in the middle of nowhere is exactly what I had in mind when we left this morning." He chuckled again, but this time it faded quickly. His eyes lingered on me, thoughtful, as if he wanted to say something but didn't know where to start. For a moment, all I could hear was the soft hum of the heater, the faint ticking of my watch, the uneven rhythm of my heartbeat. Then he spoke quietly. "You've been weird since we got back." I looked up. "Weird?" "Yeah." He sat on the bed opposite mine, elbows on his knees. "You keep going quiet every few minutes. Like you're somewhere else again. I'm just tired." He tilted his head. "You said that earlier, too." "Because it's true." He frowned. "No, it's not. You're hiding something." I froze. "I'm not—" "Come on," he said gently. "I know you better than that." And that was the problem. He did. He could tell when I was pretending to be fine, when my jokes were just distractions. He noticed every small shift in tone, every pause. He saw through things I wished he wouldn't. I started, but the words caught in my throat. "It doesn't matter." "It clearly does." He leaned closer, searching my face. The nearness of him made it harder to breathe. "Talk to me," he said quietly. I met his eyes then, and something in me gave way. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was the way he said it, not as a demand, but as an invitation. "I can't," I said finally. He frowned, confused. "Why not?" "Because it'll change everything." He went still. "What will?" I swallowed hard. "What I want to say." The silence between us stretched, thick and unbroken. He didn't move, didn't speak, just watched me, and for once, I couldn't look away. There it was again, that flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. Not pity, not amusement, something closer to understanding. He shifted slightly, voice soft but steady. "You can tell me anything." "You know that," I laughed quietly, though it came out wrong, sharp and trembling. "Not this. You'd think I'm insane." He gave a small, crooked smile. "I already think that sometimes." It should have made me laugh, but it didn't. I just looked at him, heart thudding too hard, too fast. "I'm serious." "So am I," he said, leaning back slightly. "Whatever it is, just say it. I'd rather hear it than watch you keep tearing yourself up over it." And maybe that was all I needed. A small push. I took a breath. Then another. "I like you," I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. "Not as a friend, not like that. I mean," I stopped, words tumbling uselessly. "I've tried not to. I really have. But it's there. And it's not going away." The world seemed to stop. He didn't say anything for what felt like forever. His eyes stayed on me, wide but not angry, not shocked either. Just quiet. Processing. I looked away, heat rising in my face. "You don't have to say anything. I couldn't keep pretending. It's exhausting." He ran a hand over his face, exhaling slowly. "Wow. Yeah," I said, my voice breaking. "Not exactly how I wanted to spend the night, believe me." He gave a shaky laugh, then looked back at me. "You really mean that?" "I wouldn't risk saying it if I didn't." He went quiet again, thinking. His expression softened. Not pity, but something warmer, more fragile. "I don't know what to say," he admitted finally. "You kind of dropped that out of nowhere." "I know," I said quickly, "and I'm not expecting anything. You're straight, you've said it before. I get it. I just needed to be honest. He stared at the floor for a long time. You really thought I wouldn't notice? Notice what? The way you look at me sometimes, he said quietly. Like you're trying not to. My chest tightened. You noticed that? He nodded slowly. Yeah, I just didn't know what it meant. I thought maybe I was imagining it. There was something new in his tone now. Hesitation, maybe curiosity. I didn't want to make things weird. I said softly. You're my friend. The last thing I wanted was to ruin that. You haven't ruined anything, he said quickly. I looked up, surprised. He ran a hand through his hair again, searching for words. It's just, I don't know. I've never really thought about it before. You and me. But when you said it, he trailed off, shaking his head slightly. It didn't sound wrong, just unexpected. That word, unexpected, hung in the air like a fragile promise. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees again. You've been my closest mate for months. I trust you more than anyone. And yeah, maybe I've noticed things I didn't want to think about too much. Like how I always end up sitting next to you, or how it feels weird when you're not around. I felt something stir in my chest. Hope, fragile but real. He met my eyes again, his voice low. It's confusing, but I don't hate it. The words hit harder than they should have. You don't have to say that to make me feel better, I murmured. I'm not, he said. I mean it. We sat in silence again, but it felt different now. Not empty. Just heavy with all the things that didn't need to be said. Finally, he stood, crossing the small space between our beds. He hesitated for a moment before sitting beside me. You look terrified, he said softly. I am, he smiled faintly. Me too. I looked at him, searching for some hint of what he was thinking. His gaze flicked between my eyes, my mouth, then back again. This doesn't have to change everything, he said, his voice barely above a whisper, unless you want it to. I don't know what I want anymore, I admitted. I just know what I feel. Yeah, he murmured. Same. He hesitated then, and for a heartbeat, it felt like the world had gone completely still. His hand brushed against mine, just barely, enough to make my pulse trip. Neither of us moved away. It's okay, he said quietly. You can breathe. I laughed softly, more out of nerves than anything. Easier said than done. He smiled again, small, real, a little uncertain. You always overthink everything. Maybe just don't this time. And then, in the smallest, most natural way, his hand found mine. No rush, no drama, just a simple, quiet gesture that somehow said everything. The room felt warmer suddenly. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was full. We stayed like that, hands barely linked, not saying a word. I didn't need to. For once, everything made sense without explanation. After a long while, he spoke again, voice soft. We'll figure it out, yeah? Yeah, I whispered. And when he leaned his head lightly against my shoulder, it wasn't a confession anymore. It was an answer, an unspoken promise that whatever this was, whatever it could become, it was real. The rain had eased by morning, leaving behind a silence that felt impossibly delicate, like the world itself was holding its breath for us. I woke before him, though I wasn't sure I'd really slept at all. The weight of last night still hung between us, not heavy, not awkward, just real. He was lying on his side, facing me. His hair was an untidy mess from sleep, lashes casting faint shadows across his cheeks. There was a softness to him I'd never noticed quite like this before. Unguarded, gentle, almost boyish. The kind of face that made my chest tighten without permission. When his eyes flickered open, for a moment he just blinked at me, confusion fading into something warmer. Then he smiled, slow and sleepy. Morning, he murmured, voice rough from sleep. Morning, I whispered back, my throat dry. A beat passed, then two. Neither of us moved. His hand resting near mine twitched like he wanted to reach for me but wasn't sure if he could. I couldn't stop staring at it. The distance between our fingers felt like a decision waiting to happen. Finally he exhaled and let out a quiet laugh, rubbing his face. So, that wasn't a dream, was it? No, I said softly. It wasn't. He nodded, the ghost of a smile tugging at his lips. Good, yeah, good. The way he said it, careful, unsure, but still sincere, made something bloom in me I'd spent months trying to bury. We sat up slowly, the duvet slipping between us like a reminder of what had changed. Outside, pale light poured through the cottage window, turning the room golden. Everything looked ordinary, yet nothing felt the same. He stretched, groaning softly, then looked at me with that familiar teasing grin. You realize this means you can't call me your straight roommate anymore, right? I choked on a laugh. Was I calling you that? Constantly. Don't deny it. I shook my head, a smile tugging at the corners of my mouth. All right, maybe once or twice. He grinned wider. More like every week. Guess you'll have to come up with a new title now. I'll think of something less incriminating, I said. The laughter eased the tension, but it didn't erase it. Beneath the playfulness, I could still feel the thrum of uncertainty, both of us balancing on the edge of something neither had words for yet. He noticed my hesitation and shifted closer, voice softening. Hey, are you okay with all this? His question caught me off guard, not because I hadn't expected it, but because of the gentleness behind it. He wasn't just asking for reassurance. He was offering it too. I am, I said honestly. It's just new, unexpected. Yeah, he breathed out, glancing away for a moment. Same here. I've been thinking about it all night. About you, the words hung between us, fragile but powerful. I watched him trace a nervous line on the duvet with his thumb before continuing. I don't know what happens next, he admitted, but I know I don't want to pretend last night didn't happen. That admission, so open, so him, hit me harder than any declaration could have. Then we won't, I said. We just see where it goes. No pressure. No pretending. His eyes met mine again, steady this time. See where it goes, yeah? Yeah. For a long while we didn't speak. He leaned against the headboard, our shoulders brushing, a quiet comfort in the closeness. Every touch now carried a weight that wasn't heavy. It was grounding. At some point, he reached over and nudged my leg with his foot, smirking. You know, I was half expecting you to bolt the moment I fell asleep. I raised an eyebrow. And missed the chance to see your hair like that? Never, he groaned. Brilliant. My first morning after anything remotely romantic, and I look like I've been electrocuted. Adorable, actually, I said before I could stop myself. His grin faltered for half a heartbeat, then softened. You really mean that? I nodded, unable to look away. Yeah, I do. He didn't reply right away. Just leaned in slightly, his voice a whisper when it finally came. You're going to make this really hard to keep casual, aren't you? Probably, I said, smiling. Good, he murmured. We stayed there like that, the world small and still around us. It wasn't a grand declaration or a cinematic moment. It was quieter than that. Just two people finally letting the truth exist between them without fear. When we finally got up to pack, the air between us was lighter. We moved around each other easily, sharing quiet jokes and stolen glances. At one point, he reached past me to grab his bag, his fingers brushing mine again, just enough to send a familiar spark running up my arm. Later, as we stepped outside into the crisp morning, he slung his arm around my shoulders like he'd done 100 times before. But this time, it meant something new. Ready? He asked. Yeah, I said, looking at him, really looking. More than ever. He smiled, and for the first time, it felt like we were both walking towards something instead of away from it. The sky had cleared by the time we reached the train station, the air sharp with the scent of rain-soaked fields. The world looked washed clean. Like everything that had happened between us had somehow changed the way I saw color itself. He walked beside me, his backpack slung over one shoulder, hair still a little damp from the drizzle that had caught us earlier. Every few steps his arm brushed mine, not by accident this time. Each touch felt deliberate, grounding, like a quiet reminder that what had happened wasn't going to vanish in the daylight. Neither of us said much at first. We didn't need to. There was a calm between us now that didn't feel fragile anymore. It felt earned. As we found a bench under the awning, waiting for the train, he glanced at me and smiled that lopsided grin I'd come to know too well. Still thinking about last night? He asked, voice teasing but soft around the edges. Maybe, I said, playing along. Depends who's asking, he chuckled. Just your ex-straight roommate, apparently. I laughed, shaking my head. You're never going to drop that, are you? Not a chance. The banter flowed easily, but behind it was something deeper. A quiet understanding that words alone couldn't hold. I caught him watching me once or twice, his gaze thoughtful, like he was still piecing together how we'd ended up here. A gust of wind swept through the platform, and instinctively he shifted closer, his shoulder brushing mine again. This time he didn't move away. I've been thinking, he said after a while, his tone more serious now. When we get back, things might feel a bit weird for a while. People notice stuff. They'll ask questions. I nodded slowly. Yeah, I've thought about that too. He glanced at me, eyes searching. And you're okay with it? With people knowing, eventually? It took me a moment to answer, not because I wasn't sure, but because I wanted to say it right. I don't care who knows, I said finally. As long as we're honest with each other. His jaw tensed slightly, and then his expression softened. You really mean that? Yeah, I said. I've spent too long hiding how I feel. I'm done with that. For a moment he didn't reply. Then, without a word, he reached over and took my hand. It wasn't dramatic or rushed, just simple, steady. His thumb brushed against mine, a quiet reassurance in the middle of the noise around us. A few people passed by, but I didn't care. For the first time, it didn't matter who saw. He looked down at our hands and smiled faintly. Guess this makes it official then. I grinned. What does? He tilted his head toward our joined hands. This, us, whatever we're calling it. Roommates with emotional complications? I suggested. He laughed, really laughed, and it was the kind of sound that made everything inside me feel lighter. You're impossible. Yet here you are, I said, smirking. Yeah, he murmured, squeezing my hand gently. Here I am. The train arrived with a low hum, brakes hissing against the damp rails. We boarded quietly, finding seats by the window. The countryside blurred past as we began the journey back to the city. Fields, cottages, and distant hills fading into motion. He leaned back, stretching his legs out, his knee brushing against mine again. The small touches didn't make me nervous anymore. They made me feel seen. After a while, he turned his head toward me. So, what happens next? I thought for a moment, watching the reflection of the sky ripple across the glass. We go home, keep living, keep figuring it out. Together? He asked. I looked at him, unable to stop the smile that rose. Together. He nodded, as if testing the word on his tongue, then said it again, quietly, like a promise. Together. The train rocked gently as it moved, the sound of rain fading in the distance. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the small silver lighter I'd given him months ago, the one he'd borrowed and never returned. He flicked it open, stared at it for a second, then handed it to me. Keep it, I said. He shook his head. Nah, you gave it to me for luck. Guess I might need it more now. I smiled at that, the meaning not lost on either of us. Then don't lose it this time. I won't, he said quietly. Not this. Or you. The world outside blurred into gold and green, the sun breaking through scattered clouds. I leaned back, feeling the warmth of his shoulder against mine. And for the first time in a long while, everything felt right. Not perfect, not simple, but real. He nudged me lightly, that familiar smirk tugging at his lips. You know, for someone who swore he'd never live with anyone again, you're doing a pretty good job of making me want to stay. I laughed, nudging him back. Then stay. The rent's not going down anytime soon, he grinned. That's one way to keep me around. Whatever works, I said. Smiling, we sat there, watching the landscape roll by, the silence between us comfortable and full of promise. When the train finally slowed near the city, he leaned closer and whispered, Whatever happens next, we'll figure it out, yeah? Yeah, I said softly, meeting his gaze. We will. And as the train pulled into the station, his fingers found mine again, steady and sure. Not as a question this time, but as an answer.